One of the most requested topics for a video that we have here at Black Bear Forge are bolt tongs, or V-bit tongs as they're quite often referred to. Welcome back to Black Bear Forge. There are lots of different styles and approaches to making this style of tongs, and they are a very useful style of tongs. For square bar and round bar, I think they are probably the best fitting tong you're going to find. You will use them all the time if you're working in square and round bar. They hold flat bar sort of okay depending on the dimensions, but for square and round bar they are great tongs. And they need to be made to fit a specific size square or round bar to work at their best. So you'll make a lot of these. If you're working in quarter, 3/8, half, 5/8, 3/4, you need tongs in all of those different sizes. So I thought we would do a little series on making some different varieties of V-bit tongs. I have a couple of sets here that are pre-cut tong blanks. Now this great big heavy set are from Ken's Custom Iron, and I think I'll save those for one of the other videos because they are a fairly big set, and I want to establish the concepts and some of what you need to do to make a good set of tongs before we get onto these. And this is another set of pre-cut blanks that I got at the Utah conference the other day. And I think we're going to start with these today. I've never made a pair from a blank that looks like this, so it might be kind of interesting, but it should also be fairly straightforward as long as we're careful with them. So I think we're going to go ahead and make these. And then in another video, we'll look at the pause tong style, and we'll look at forging your own blank so you don't have to have a plasma cut blank. We'll look at forging the blank and doing just a more classic V-bit tongs. These are a pair I made ages ago. They're kind of rough, but they work just fine. Now this pair of blanks was plasma cut, so there's a lot of slag or flash or whatever you want to call it on the back side of it that needs to be cleaned up. And it seems likely that a grinder would work, but I find that it's pretty loose, and once you get under it, it breaks off in nice big pieces just by sticking a chisel under it and peeling it. I broke some off with my fingernail, but then I decided that might be a good way to get a metal sliver under your fingernail, and I'd rather use a chisel. So that's quick and simple to do, and that gets this off of there so we don't forge it down into the piece and leave a bunch of ugly marks in the tongs. Well, let's go light a forge and get to work. I think I want to start by cleaning up and drawing out the reins just a little. These are already about 1/4 by 5/16. They don't want to be much lighter, so mostly I'm going to be rounding up the profile so they're more comfortable to hold on to, and then we'll turn them around and we'll do the jaw in. I'm going to go ahead and work in the gas forge because it's already set up and ready to go. You'll notice I've moved it over on top of the coal forge. This is where I prefer to work with it, but during the summer it's so hot I had it moved over there. Now it's back here. It'll be a little bit more convenient. So I just want to take the sharp edges off of these reins, and maybe I'll draw them out just a little at the very end. This is just to make them more comfortable. They are plenty long enough. About all we need to do to that. It occurs to me that I should probably give you the dimensions of the starting cutout before I start shaping the jaws of the tong. So let's take a quick look at that. These were cut out of 1/4 by 3/4, or the rough size is 1/4 by 3/4. I think these were cut out of sheet as opposed to cut out of flat bar, but you could pretty readily forge this shape out of a flat bar, and we're going to look at doing that as one of our other approaches to this. From the tip to the hole is 4 inches. There's 1.5 inches left where the V-bit will be. And from the high point is about 2 inches here. And that's really about all you need to know. The overall length is, and this is after I've cleaned it up a little bit, 16.5. So it's probably 16 inches to start with. And from the pivot point, it's now 13 inches. So that's just a quick look at what this is. This would be an easy blank to create out of a piece of 1/4 by 3/4 flat stock, whether you forged it or if you cut this on a bandsaw, although that seems like an awful lot of work to me. I think it'd be just as easy to draw this out. And like I say, we will do that in a future video. We're probably going to make a 6 different versions of V-bit tongs. And we'll do the same thing with this one. Just lightly clean it up. A light taper to the end. And give the edges a really nice chamfer, or actually kind of go to a round or oval shape, especially down through here where you hold on to them. I'm just going to kind of round that up just a little bit. Be more of an oval than it will be a round because it's a little bit wider than it is thick, and I want to leave that for maximum strength. These will still be a fairly light duty pair of tongs. Before they're completely cool, try and smooth up any rough spots, sharp edges, and get them straight. Let's see if they're the same length. And that looks pretty good. So let's let these cool a little bit so that they're not floppy or easy to deform. Still hold on to them with a pair of tongs. And then we'll move to doing the jaw end. Of course, now a pair of V-bit tongs are just the thing to hold these in. Now, because the hole has already been cut in here when these were made, I don't want to do this at the edge of the anvil. I think I will end up deforming that hole. So I'm going to come over to the vise with a spacer in it, or with a vise jaw insert that has a rounded edge, and I'll put this in so that this shoulder lines up with the jaw, and this rounded edge then is just a little bit higher, I think. And then I'll move that over with a ball peen hammer and try to keep this fairly straight because it's going to need to be straightened out anyways. But then we'll clean up the jaw end after we get a nice curve in this. This goes in the vise. I'm going to bring that up just a little bit. Is a nice shape right there. That may be all we really need to do. This will probably need to be closed up through here because that's kind of wide right now, so we may work on that a little bit. So since I had to bring the other one up, I'm going to start with this one a little bit higher up. right from the beginning. It looks about the same. So these are very close. This one just needs to kick over a little bit. But if we put this together, they're going to be way too far apart. So this really needs to continue to bow around, and then this needs to straighten out. So that'll be the next thing to do. Well, I forgot to turn the camera on. I used the exact same technique right here in the vise and push this over. Now I'll go to the anvil and try to clean all that up and make sure both pieces match. This is really just a matter of trying to clean everything up, make it look neat, and establishing the general size of your tongs at this point, or at least something close to what you're going to want. And the way to sort of figure that out is to look at the line across the jaw. A parallel line across here should intersect the hole for a small pair of tongs. The further down this way that goes, the larger the stock that you're going to hold ultimately. And of course, you're really thinking about what will happen when the V-cut gets put in there. But because this one now comes out clear up here on top of the jaws, there's no way that's going to hold anything. So I need to bring this back a little bit. To do that, I'm just going to put a spacer, I think maybe a 1/4 inch spacer on the anvil, and work it this way and leave this up and drive this down, and I think everything should work out perfect. Just put that down flat to the anvil and this down flat to my spacer, so it takes a little back and forth. That's looking pretty good. So now if we come across, the top of that makes a straight line right to the center of the hole. And for a 1/4 inch pair of tongs, that's probably about right, because we'll cut this down a 1/4 inch and spread it, so the actual contact point will be a little further down. So we're going to leave that there for now. And of course, do the exact same thing to the other one. Try not to crush the hole. I think my preference would be to put the hole in there after all the forging, but that's not the way it came. So that now pretty much heads for the center of the hole like the other one did. There may be some tweaking after they're assembled. Those pretty much are an exact match, so that's just what we want. Now it's time to cut a chisel groove. So before we do this, take a moment to sharpen your chisel. This will go a lot easier. And I'm going to start this with the material cold, just so I can take my time and lay out a nice centered line. And this is just a marker to use when I come back hot. I'll actually do most of the cutting hot. I go ahead and move the chisel every blow just to make sure that I'm really cutting a straight line. You also want to make sure you're straight up and down this way. Cutting cold material might wear out your chisel a little bit faster, so you may have to sharpen it between blanks. And then sharpen it again before you go to the hot work. Once you get back to the hot work, it probably won't dull it up too badly. You just want a nice line you can find easily when it's hot, so you're not messing around losing heat. This line right now probably is not a 1/16 of an inch deep, but it will be enough to find it. Now if you're having trouble keeping things in the vise and it's sinking down and it annoys you, you can put a little support in here. But that does give you a lot less material to grip back here. So it may not be as secure, but it won't sink. So you just have to decide which issue you're willing to deal with. And I suppose if you're going to do a lot of these, you could set up some sort of a bottom die and a treadle hammer that holds this just right. And do it that way. But this really doesn't take too long, especially if you're just making 1 or 2 pairs of tongs. So I'm going to get these hot and touch up the edge of my chisel real quick. Although really it isn't bad, but I think I'd like it just as sharp as I can get it. So this looks exactly the same, only hot, so it'll go a lot faster. Because I have a nice groove to follow. It makes my life much easier. You want to go not quite a 1/4 of an inch here, because I'm going to use 1/4 inch material. If you go over a 1/4 inch, the edges of the tongs will bump into each other before you are tight down to the material you're trying to work with. That's probably about all I want to do. I'm going to get it hot again. And then at that point we can spread this to 90 degrees. I'll go ahead and finish the cut in the other one before we spread the first one, I think. Seems to make more sense. And if you see this going off, you can try to correct the chisel cut. Getting way off and cutting one of these tabs off just ruins the tongs, and you're pretty well starting over at that point. Spreading this to 90 degrees is really quite simple. You just need your high-tech tool here, which is a piece of square bar. And just drive it down in there until this is 90 degrees. We'll do some cleaning up on this as we assemble it to make sure everything really fits right, but that is really all it takes. And keep an eye on which way it's going. If you need to drive it over a little bit because it's not moving evenly, this is the time to do it. You can even take this like this and drive that over a little bit. And there is tong half number 2. The next thing to do will be to assemble these, and I'm going to let them cool before I do that. I have drilled our 2 tong halves out to take a 5/16 rivet. I think a 1/4 inch rivet would be fine, but the hole was already pretty much sized for that. It was just deformed from forging, so it needed to be cleaned up with a drill bit. And I knocked the edges off so there's no sharp edges to try to shear the rivet. So now we just need to set the rivet, and I'm going to go ahead and heat this with a torch. I think that's a bit more controlled and easier to do. You might be able to set it cold, but 5/16 is a bit large for a cold rivet. Now I'm going to use a rivet header to get a nice clean rivet on this. So he didn't quite leave enough for the rivet head, so I'm going to just clean that up with the hand hammer real quick. That rivet would hold these forever probably, but I think it can be a little bit neater. And like most tongs, of course, they're now riveted too tight to actually move. Well, they move a little bit. A little bit of work, those will work. But they're also very off-center, so we're going to need to fix all of that stuff. Well, now we have to turn this kind of crooked mess into an actual working pair of tongs. The first thing I'm going to do is try and bring the jaws parallel to each other. So I'm just going to heat up this much of it, and I'll do that in the forge and then cool it as need be to keep the rivet area cold and the jaw area cold, and just heat up this bow, and I'll do that in a bending fork. After that, we'll take care of this misalignment this way, take care of the reins, and during all that, these should loosen up a little bit, and if they don't, then the final thing will be to loosen them up. So there's a little bit of work to do, but I think we're up to it. So I just want to kind of bend these so they're parallel with each other. And we're going to get more opportunity to work on those as we go. But that's pretty good for that. Now let's go to the vise and fix this other little issue with these not lining up. So to do this, I'm going to put that as low as I can in the vise. And it's going to clamp up crooked, but that's okay. You're going to line it up based on what it should be, not what the vise shows you, or what. And we're going to just bend those around with this same bar that I used earlier. We're going to get those started to line up. That's going to have to get hot again. They're twisted, so I'm going to have to grab them and twist them this way. And all the fiddling and fussing you have to do with a pair of tongs like this is just very typical. And the nicer the tongs you're making, the more of this you're probably going to have to deal with. That's looking pretty good that direction. Now let's make sure some material actually fits in that. That'll be our next step. I have a piece of 1/4-inch bar, and I'm going to mark one end so that I can identify it, and this is the end that is not going to go into the tongs, and this should be the cold end. It should be safe to pick up. Otherwise, you're liable to grab something you really don't want to grab. So those don't quite work well enough to do this yet. There we go. So these still need a fair amount of tweaking and adjusting here just to get them onto this bar. But once we do that, we can kind of work these lips. Opposites on one end of the anvil and then opposites on the other end of the anvil, and try and get everything squared up and even. And that's holding pretty well, but my reins are now really tight together, and that's not what I want. I'm going to take that out. Remember where the cold end is. Make sure this still Works smoothly. 1/4 inch square bar back in the jaws. You can hold that gently, and I can very carefully pull these out till I think they're the right grip. And I've cooled up to the rivet so that I'm less likely to shear and damage the rivet. I think that's pretty much what I want at this point. That feels nice and comfortable. I'm going to give them a good wire brushing, see if I can figure out where to put my touch mark on these, which I probably should have done before we assembled them. But rarely is all hope lost. We can almost always succeed. So those just need a little bit of wax on them to help lubricate the joint and prevent rust. We'll do that as they cool. So they're still hot, too hot to touch. We're going to put a little bit of paste wax on here. This is just paste wax you'd use on the floor. I use Johnson's paste wax, but there are others that work just fine. And you could use a shop-made wax and oil blend. I just think it makes for a nicer looking tool. It helps lubricate the joint, protects somewhat from rust, although after you've used these in the fire for a while they aren't going to be as well waxed. You'll burn the wax off eventually. It's better not to actually wax these on the anvil because you end up getting wax on your anvil and you don't really need that. But it's easier to do for the video. Well, here we have it. A nice little set of V-bit tongs that hold 1/4 inch square bar. They would also hold very nicely a piece of 1/4 inch round bar. Real useful pair of tongs. These will see lots of use in the shop. These were made from a pre-cut blank, and if you don't remember what the dimensions were, go back earlier in the video and take a look and you can see exactly what the dimensions and the shape of that blank were. But we can also do this by forging the entire blank. We don't have to start with a pre-cut blank. It's convenient. It kind of gives you an idea of what your initial forging needs to look like. But once you've got your head wrapped around that, there's no reason you can't forge this from a piece of bar stock. And the next time we make some V-bit tongs, that's exactly what we'll do. Now, what would I do different if I were to do this again if I had more of these blanks? Well, for one thing, I would touch mark before we assemble them. That would be a lot easier. I also think if you're making the blank yourself, leave the rivet hole out until you're through forging all of this, and then punch or drill it right before you're ready to assemble, and that way you're not going to mess things up as much. The rivet hole had to be drilled out because it was all twisted and bent and out of shape after all the forging, and that's going to happen no matter what. So you might as well just drill it in the first place after you're all done with all that stuff. The other thing that I think I would do is probably make these a little bit shorter. I don't think they need to be that long, and if you're doing various hooks, like an S hook, this being too long could get in the way of bending that extra hook. So if it's a little bit shorter, sometimes that's more convenient for you. But I would also cut them, if I'm going to cut them, I will cut them this way. And that gets this corner out of your way just a little bit. And I'll probably do that to this pair of tongs. I'll just do it a little bit later. And one other thing you can do is take a square file and file a notch in here so you can hold material crossways as well as in line with the jaws. And that is very useful with any kind of V-bit tong to have that notch cut in there. But we'll look at some of those issues when we make the next set. We're going to leave this as basic and simple as we can and get a little bit more advanced when we do the next one, and we'll add the V-notch and maybe cut that and bevel it back. And I'll probably do that to these, just not as part of this video. We'll do it as a separate video. Well, I hope you found that video to be interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Love it if you hit that subscribe button. Feel free to stick around, watch as many of the videos as you'd like. Share the videos with your friends or on your social media pages. If you'd like to support the channel financially, there are links down in the description for PayPal and Patreon, but those are simply donation. It's not expected, and the videos will remain free. There is no paid content. In the meantime, I hope you can get out to your shop. I hope you can make something, maybe make a pair of tongs, but do it safely. Wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.